As as he mentioned, I am an industrial engineer with an MBA that I took in the Pontificia Universidad Católica in Dominican Republic. And then I worked 40 years with Colgate, starting in the marketing department here in Colombia. And then through the experience and the time, I became a general manager of Colgate Andina. Today, the presentation is about one of my experience that I had when I was the general manager in Central America that hopefully will be interesting for your class. Basically, the first comment is that the conference is just for academic purposes. So all the financial figures obviously are not the real ones that Colgate used to have there. It's basically modified in order to highlight the subject that we are discussing in this presentation. So let me talk about this experience that we call today re-engineering in Central America. That was basically one of the big projects that ended up being expanded to other regions in the globe. So first of all, let me explain what was the role of my boss. He was the president of the Latin American division, one of the 6 divisions that the corporation had, and obviously one of the most important for the company. First of all, to say that in Latin America, there are almost 650 million inhabitants that make it really a very interesting region, and a population that is growing between 2 or 3% in an annual basis. And on top of that, the good thing is that half of the population has less than 25 years of age. So as a result of that, I think that is a huge potential in the region if we really invest to develop the talent of the people that we have in the region. The other interesting thing is, despite the fact that the pandemic really hit all the economies in Latin America, I think that it is showing good numbers of recovery, especially this year and in Colombia. So I am expecting that also the per capita income per inhabitant also will increase in the near future after passing these 2 or 3 years of the pandemic effect. You remember probably this graph that it is basically the strategic graph analysis that Boston Consulting Group did, that is basically identifying the star product or star strategic business unit, the one that has a strong presence in the market and also very profitable for the company. Then you have a set of products. In this case, we call the plus icon, that is basically the one that shows a good potential to grow in the future, but probably we need to get some money from other areas of the company in order to invest aggressively and develop these brands. The number 3 is basically what we call the cash cow. These cash cow brands are the ones that are generating big money. You don't see really a bright future for this brand, so you prefer basically to use that money to reinvest in the one that we presented before, the plus icon. And finally, there is the category of dog head products that are the one that very weak in the market, very low market share, and on top of that, obviously, they are making few profit. So as a result of that, the question mark is basically if in the future you prefer to divest or sell this piece of the business because you don't see the opportunity to invest in the company. So the main contribution of this strategic tool is basically how we can finance some of the categories or products that could have really a big potential to grow in the future. Based on that strategic tool, my boss, the president of the Latin American division, was trying to do something similar. And he started by drawing a quadrant when in one of the axes he has a representation of the profitability of the countries. In this case, I am using the return on sales. This is ROS, is basically return on sales. That is the net profit after taxes divided by the net sales of the company. So this is the percentage that I'm putting in that axis. The other is basically the share of market that for me represent how strong is our business in the specific country. And based on that, just for the convention, I divided the x-axis, the share of market, basically to the left, the strong ones, and to the right, the weak ones. Also, I did the same for the profitability axis, and moving up is basically the most profitable for the company, and moving down is the less profitable. So based on that, he basically add these two lines that create what I call the profitability corridor. That works basically to say this is the theoretical profitability that you could get in the market depending on how strong is your business in that specific country. For example, if you are very strong, obviously you are expecting to receive high profitability level, and you will be where the arrow is. High profitability because you are strong. If you are at the other extreme, that you are weak in the market, obviously you are expecting to receive few cents because you don't have the muscle to make your business profitable. And depending obviously on how strong you are, obviously you move through this theoretical corridor to give you a flavor how you are performing in profitability in the specific country. So let me show you what he could do with this important chart. First of all, he took a country, the biggest one for his division, and he put here the line of how strong is the business. In this case, it's very strong, and how much is the profitability that he is getting out of that country. And he plot here the biggest business unit that he has, that is Mexico. Mexico is 200 million inhabitants with a very good per capita income. So our business is huge in Mexico, close to $1 billion in sales. The same thing he did basically with the next country. He put here how strong is, in this case is weak, but he was developing the profitability close to 21%. So he plot basically Brazil. And in this case, he saw, okay, I am making here much money than the one that we are entitled due to the strongest in the market. So as a result of that, I prefer to increase the investment behind this business to really make them stronger in the future. So that was basically the strategic decision that he took for that country. In the same way, he was plotting the other countries in Latin America, Colombia and Venezuela, the second two biggest unit, then Argentina, the fifth one, and then the other small countries, some in the strong side, some in the weak side, one in the profitable area, others in the non-profitable area. Since I am interested to explain what happened in Central America, now I am going to add the Central American countries there. Starting here with Guatemala, a strong business, Costa Rica, strong business, but low profitability. Panama also some strongness, but also low profitability. Salvador, very profitable and very strong, excuse me, Nicaragua, very strong, but low profitability. Honduras, and finally Belize, a small piece of the business, but since it's in Central America, obviously is part of the strategy. Analyzing this chart, he circled all the Central American countries, and he said, my God, this is what is happening here. All the countries that we have in Central America are basically strong. These belong into the quadrant of strong, but all of them also are in the less profitable areas. So we have to do something to make these countries even more profitable than the one we have today, and hopefully also maintaining them in the strong area of the graph. So when we put all those countries together, you see that Central America was a strong business and also a big one. Is close to the size of Venezuela and Colombia. So was very strong, but weak in terms of profitability. So the strategy for Central America was to find a project how we could maintain the strongness of the business, but at the same time improve the profitability of the company from 17% up probably to 21, 23, and so on in the near future. So let's see how this works. Now let me explain what was the political conditions in the area and what was the structure that the company used to have back to the times when we were discussing this project. First of all, talking about Central America, it is a set of countries, 7 countries, with a population close to 50 million. 50 million inhabitants is more or less the population of Colombia. And on top of that, the economy of the region, Central American region, is close to $28 billion. That is also very similar to the Colombia. So I would say that Central America, more or less, is the representation of Colombia as a country. Central America is basically divided in 3 levels of economies, starting with Costa Rica and Panama in the south, that they represent 20% of the population in this region, and the per capita income is close to $8,000 a year. So it's pretty high, the per capita income and the economy in those 2 countries. Then Guatemala and Salvador represent 50% of the population in this area, with a per capita income that is similar to Colombia, between $4,000 and $5,000 a year. And the last 3 countries, Belize, Honduras, and Nicaragua, represent 30% of the population, and the per capita income is between $1,500 to $2,500 per capita. The other interesting thing is that back to 1975, I think, the Central American countries get together and create a free trade agreement. So they have basically a commercial region between those 3 countries. When they have basically 4 key elements. The first one is they have a common tariff to import raw material or finished goods from any country outside this region, have to pay the same amount of taxes independent of what country is the one that is importing. For example, Guatemala will pay 10% for a finished good. In Panama also will pay 10% for a finished good importation. So it's the same common tariff for all countries in the region. Second thing is that for production into the region, there is no import taxes to move to other countries. For example, you could produce in Panama, ship it to Guatemala without paying any import taxes. And the same thing from Honduras to Costa Rica, and any combination that you want, there is no import duties between. It's more or less as is working the Pact, Andina Pact in this region. The third element is they have country by country more or less the same tax structure. For example, for income tax is 30% in all countries. The sales tax is 10 or 12% for all countries. And also the dividends taxes are more or less the same in all countries. And the last element is that every citizen in the region is allowed to work in any of the 7 countries without major documentation. So that is something easy also to move executives around without having issues with the immigration. So now let me explain how was Colgate structured back to those years. First of all the countries were basically working independent and reporting to the division in New York. And the 3 main countries, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and Panama, used to have a full organization. The blue circle means administration organization that was full 100%, marketing, sales, finance, human resources in that area. Also, the blue box, the green box represent factories, and also every country used to have its own factory. Obviously, since the market is very small, the production was very small too, and the equipment also was very, I would say, small and with low efficient. Most of the activities also done by hand. Also, we have Honduras and El Salvador with a full administration structure, but a factory that was basically dedicated to assemble at put label and arm some of the deals that we do for the consumer. And finally, in Belize and Nicaragua, we used to have just sales offices and no finance, no production and things like that. So based on that, this was basically the profile of the profit and loss statement, el estado de pérdidas y ganancias. And here, basically, I have a simplified one, not with all accounts that the financial people use. I use here, for example, this is net sales. This is the variable factory cost, raw material, packaging material, and the labor to produce the product. Then if we deduct from sales, deduct the variable cost, we arrive to the margin. And this is the percentage. This is one of the indicators that are more used during in the company, and especially for the marketing people. What is the profitability, the gross profitability that you are getting in your product? Then there is the line of fixed costs, los costos fijos, and the deduction between the costos margin and costos fijos. Obviously, here is the operating profit. That is a line that I'm not showing here in the chart, just to keep that as simple as possible. Then we have the advertising investment that in Colgate is basically is media production cost of the advertising pieces plus production, plus promotion, excuse me, promotion. And the deduction of from the margin of the fixed cost and the advertising, basically we arrive to contribution. That is basically the profitability of the company before taxes. And here in other expenses, I have the taxes. And finally, deducting from contribution, the taxes, we arrive to the net profit after tax. That is the most important, obviously, for a company. So based on this explanation, we analyze, and what we used to have here is a set of different countries with a small business in each one. $2 million in a year, $15 million. Costa Rica and Panama, well developed, but the small countries in population is close to $40 million in sales. So it was really a set of a small business unit compared with $1 billion in Mexico or in Brazil. Obviously, every country was really small. Also, with a high fixed expenses, the company is looking to have a fixed expenses in a country level close to 15%. And in this case, we were having 5 points more. We have a fixed cost of 20%. That was too high. The second important thing for the company is the profitability, that they are looking for a 20% in a year basis, and the profitability that we were basically delivering was 3 points less than the objective. And the only way to manage and arrive to a number closer to the 20% was because we were investing few money in advertising. And as a result of that, obviously the sales wasn't growing at the pace that the company was expecting. So that was basically the profile, $200 million in a year. That is a good one with a low profitability and obviously low advertising investment. So if we see that in a little more detail, this is the Guatemala making 50 margin. That wasn't good enough, not that bad, but that's good enough. High MBOs, and also delivering 2 points less than the objective that the company was looking for. Then we analyzed Costa Rica, better margin, 5 points more than Guatemala, but huge MBOs, 23% over the region, and also too high compared with the 15 that the corporation was looking in a country. And finally, delivering 5 points less than the objective to deliver 20% in profitability. And we review Panama was similar to Costa Rica with a higher MBOs and obviously delivering less profitability and the lowest in the region. So based on that, the company said, oh my God, our issue in that area is basically the high MBOs that we are managing in our country, especially in Costa Rica and in Panama. So the idea was to develop a program how we could reduce the MBO line by restructuring the company. And we agree that the money that we are going to save in the fixed cost will be dropped to profitability, to improve the profitability of the company and be closer to the 20% that the company was looking for. The second thing, they say probably we could get some synergies in the production side in order to reduce the cost, the variable factory cost of the product, and that money could be reinvested into the business in order to accelerate the growth of the sales for the region. So based on that, anyway, the goal will be to deliver at least 20% profits in the region. So let me explain how was the reengineering project in that area. First of all, the first strategic decision was to create and work like a regional organization in this region, taking advantage of the free trade agreement between these 7 countries, and also to reduce the MBO structure for the company. The first element, it was basically to consolidate production. Instead of having 5 green boxes that were the factories, we decided to have just one. And the question was, in what country we place that? So we made a gravity sales analysis, and we saw that back to 1970, the South was basically the most important, Costa Rica and Panama, because of the economy, and because Guatemala, Salvador, and Honduras were in a civil war. Obviously, the sale wasn't enough in the north, so that's why the gravity center was a little bit south. But when we see the result back to 1990, the gravity moved up to the north, and in the way that Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua continue to grow because they moved into a democracy and with a more stable socio-political environment, the sales in those countries start growing faster than in Panama and Costa Rica, so the center of gravity moved up. So as a result of that, we decided that the place that we want to build the big factory was in Guatemala, and we create the mega factory in that country. The second element was basically on top of the production side, we are going to create a full structure using the talent that we have in the entire region and putting that into Guatemala to really manage the whole region. So as a result, we end up creating a hubing center in Guatemala that has marketing, sales, finance, human resources, manufacturing, obviously, and logistics. The third element was basically to standardize the type of organization that is more efficient to run the different countries. And we started by creating one organization in Guatemala in order to test what was the more efficient model to structure the rest of the country. Since we were sure that we had the right structure, then we roll out to the rest of the countries with the same structure, so that was easy to manage, and all the processes, administration process, were basically standardized. And the fourth element, obviously, was to provide support from this hubing center in Guatemala to all countries in order to ensure that everybody will have the attention and everybody will receive the resources needed to grow the business in every country. So since we changed the strategy, we say always in administration, the organization will follow the strategy. So let me explain how was the organization that we create in Central America. First of all, by creating a general manager for the entire region. And the first thing that we did is that it was a mandatory that all the country managers, country by country, will report directly to this regional general manager. As a result of that, then we have to restructure all the functions with a matrix way in order to provide services to the countries and also information to the region. So we basically organize in that way these three functions: sales, marketing, finance. Since the complexity of the region create obviously a more difficult organization to manage, we create a new department that is logistic, in charge to manage the finished good from the warehouse to the customers in each country. Also, we create a legal department. We enlarge our human resources department, and also we add the mega factory reporting to the general manager into the region. So let me now explain a little bit the key elements of the reorganization by function. Let me show you first sales. Sales, as I mentioned, the idea was to centralize the strategy of the whole region. And as a result of that, we end up creating the first marketing group for customers. And we call this group the customer marketing department, that was in charge to develop basically the strategy and to manage the resources country by type of customer. For example, we have a group of supermarkets, we have a group of distributors, we have a group of wholesalers, and we have also a group of pharmacies that were basically the four biggest channels that we have for distribution in the region. The other interesting thing is that we basically ensure that at country level, we have all the resources for execution of the strategy that was defined from Guatemala. And as a result of that, we end up giving an investment fund as part of the responsibility of the country manager. So he has the tools and the wires to really move the company and defend from the competition. So it was basically the main activities in this department. The second department was basically marketing. Once again, this was centralized, and I would say that the main activity at the beginning was basically the standardization of products and advertising campaign. As I mentioned this morning earlier, it was silly that the company was having 7 different products in toothpaste in the region, because every country, every product manager believed that they have to adjust the product to the local habits of the consumer. And as a result of that, we end up having 7 different products. The same thing with advertising. Every country prefers to have its own campaign that they believe fit better with the cultural environment in the country. So do we say, no, we have to look for efficiency, we have to look for synergies, and the idea was to standardize. And obviously we leave the minimum personnel at country level just for the implementation of the activities that were designed here at the center in Guatemala. See here that everything was basically centralized. Media purchase, we purchased from Guatemala, the media in Panama, Costa Rica, and the rest of the countries. All the consumer inside was done from the people in Guatemala. Operating profit of every category of products was basically the one responsible in Guatemala. And the coordination with the global marketing for the launch of the new products or revitalization of the bundles also was done out of Guatemala, and the rest of the countries no relation with the global marketing. The third department was basically finance. Finance was so key to integrate this region. And the first big decision was basically to apply the SAP software in all countries and standardizing the products so everything was simplified and every country was basically working with the same procedure. Who has to approve these checks? We know that has to be let's say the financial manager of each country. So everything was basically ruled. Every process was basically standardized. So everybody knows how to work without having any issues. And also we centralized treasury, tax planning, accounting, cost accounting, audit, and budget and planning that obviously we have in Guatemala, sitting down the Panama financial expert that provide the information to the country manager to run the business at country level. We leave the minimum personnel also at country level, And I would say that we put the video conference capability in place in order that every country could talk with the center without having major problems or without needing to take an airplane and fly back to Guatemala to see for 1 or 2 hours what we have to do. The other department was logistics. As I mentioned, was a brand new department. And basically, we centralize in Guatemala, but we have an executive by country. The Panamanian planner was basically sitting close to the factory in Guatemala, but he was in charge getting the information of forecast, sales forecast from the country. And in that way, he was planning the replenishment of the finished good to Panama. Also, the main decision that they took was the creation of a modern warehouse that was a warehouse that used to have the finished good for the entire region. And we live at country level, just as small warehouses based on the replenishment time that required. For example, in Guatemala, we deliver that in the same day. So with more than 7 weeks was more than enough to cover the sales in Guatemala. In El Salvador and Honduras, we could ship the products by truck in 3 days. So for that reason, we put for them 2 weeks inventory level to have everything good service without having breaks in the finished good for us. And in the same way, Panama was the farthest from Guatemala. We shipped that by ship. And as a result of that, we end up having, in that case, 1 month coverage because of the time to replenish the inventories. So that was basically a major decision, and you will see later on that we have a big benefit in the working capital statement that is also very important. Also, we create this legal. In the past, the legal was depending of the GM, and most of the GM didn't have any knowledge about legal things. So basically, it was an area that we used to have issues because we didn't have the right person to coordinate that. So a lawyer was hired in order to create this department and obviously centralizing Guatemala. And most of the activities are basically related with the labor and the commercial law. And also we take the opportunity to include the new fashion in the industry, that is the sustainability, and also all the subject of ethical and compliance that is also very important in this moment for the culture of the company. Then we make human resources stronger, once again centralized, and they were running recruiting, selection, training, and development. Develop the salary, although salaries as the same of prices is basically in a country by country basis in order to be competitive with the salaries in the country. Just to give you an example, for example, a product manager in Panama could make from $3,000 to $4,000 a month. But this salary in Honduras could be probably the salary for a general manager, or in Belize could be the salary for I don't know, the president of the country. So for that reason, we decided to use a salary based on the country by country basis. Also, supply chain, that was very important, obviously, to build a brand new mega factory with very equipos and production lines, automaticals. Also, we consolidate all the production in that site, so that gives better arguments to negotiate with the providers, lower prices, and also they manage the capital investment money for the entire region. Let me talk about the implementation. We start basically in the first year with 3 main elements. First of all, to start building the factory that took a lot of time to build and get the lines and produce. The second one is the finance, that was the one who installed the SAP software and standardized the administration processes. And finally, Guatemala, because Guatemala was the guinea pig to analyze what we were doing with the organization and what was the most efficient organization to roll out to the rest of the country. In the second year, basically, we roll out to El Salvador and Belize, how to see that work. And also we got 2 new functions, logistics and marketing. Then we roll out to Honduras and Nicaragua, and also taking the sales centralization. And finally, when we were sure that the organization for the for the 5 countries in the top was basically working pretty well, also we roll out to the last of the countries that were Costa Rica and Panama. Then in some way, I'd say we would have a little bit of fear to do that, because Costa Rica and Panama having the better standard of living, obviously the per capita consumption and the prices and probably the quality of the product was different with the rest of the company. So let me show you what happened and what finally the result that we achieved with this reorganization and re-engineering process. First of all, this is the P&L, and I will put here the profile of the region before. So for comparative purposes, you see the benefit that we got. First of all, as we say, the first priority was to restructure the company in order to reduce the fixed expenses. And you can see that we moved from 20% down to 15%. That was basically to save $10 million in the organization. We closed, out of the 5 factories, we closed 4. And that was a major reduction in the cost structure. And the same way, we reduced the admin organization in most of the countries. So also that produced a big money, $10 million in this line of fixed expenses. The second agreement with the corporation was to look here in margin, the synergies of having a much better factory, and they agreed to put this money that we saved here into advertising and see what happened. We moved from 52% margin to 56%, creating a media investment, additional media investment of $6,500,000. That is basically 30% more money than we used to have. And on top of that, we moved the advertising from 9% to 13%. And on top of that, we were able to generate additional $2 million that was sent also to profitability. We didn't need more money in advertising, so the rest of the money moved down to profitability of the company. So the profile of the company really improved significantly, achieving basically the main goal that was to deliver 20% in profitability. In this case, we achieved 21%. And the most important thing, I would say, that we end up generating almost $9 million in additional profit and having very strong organization in the region, also with very supported countries, and on top of that, with excellent profitability. So I would say that in general was a good plan implemented in the region. So good that in the future, the company started running that. I was promoted to Colombia to create a similar organization in Andina that was basically adding together Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, and using Colombia basically as a hub center for this region. Also worked very good here in Colombia and was expanded to Argentina and the Cono Sur, and then to Africa, then to Europe, then to Asia. And in that way, many of the countries that were small in business also getting stronger due to this type of organization. So see what happened. Guatemala, Central America was basically here in the low area of profitability, move up to 21%. So here is basically the new Central American subsidiary. When we analyze how was the investment, how good was the investment, we analyze the present value of the investment. And here we see that we generate $10 million in less fixed cost every year. So if we use the internal rate of return of 7%, the net present value of that investment basically is $70 million. That we use 20 to build the mega factory in Guatemala, and 5 million to pay the indemnification of the people that it wasn't required into the new organizational structure. This gives us a payback of 30 months, that is basically 2.5 years, that for the company, it was a pretty good project. If we take in consideration that also we got the synergies in the variable cost of the product, obviously we had this $8.5 million that we saved there. With that money, basically the net present value of this project was 120 and reduced the payback of the project just to 22 months. By looking the impact in working capital, before we used to have $50 million in working capital for the region, and with the implementation, especially of the logistics department, we reduced the working capital to 43, most of them in the inventory due of the discussion that we have earlier of having the replenishment basically at country level and a big model warehouse at the center to have the product, the finished good product available for the entire region. If we take these $7 million and include into the evaluation of this investment, basically dropped down from 30 to 22, and with this 7 million reduced to just say 16 months. So it was really very, very profitable project that we implemented there. So what was the benefit, strategic benefit that we got in the region? First of all, I would say that the Central America was one of the 4 subsidiaries that were the start of this Latin American division. When we analyzed in the country by country level, all the countries that used to be in the area of low profitability move up into the area of stars. And we generate the funds for advertising that allow us to invest, especially in Panama and Honduras, in order to strengthen the business there and move up then into also into the star set of countries. Also, we start applying some of the marketing strategies to see what could be the priorities country by country and product by product. And this is an example of, I call the isometric of consumption of the different categories. And this is, for example, an example of the toothpaste business. Every point is basically the axis of 2 variables. First of all is how rich is the country, that is basically the per capita income, and how much is the per capita annual per capita consumption of toothpaste. And here, for example, this could be Suecia or England, some of the countries in Europe when they have $35,000 a year per capita, and the consumption could be probably close to 1,300 grams a year. And when we see our countries of the region, basically back to 1990, this was the lowest per capita income and the lowest per capita consumption. Panama probably the better per capita income and a reasonable per capita consumption of toothpaste. So when we analyze what happened in the next 10 years, basically we take this area to understand where was our country, and finally 10 years later, Panama could move based on per capita consumption, and if the economy continued to grow as it was growing in the past 10 years, obviously Panama will be in the year 2020 here. So that means in terms of per capita that Panama could move the per capita consumption of toothpaste from 350 almost to 600. So it was a big jump in consumption that allowed us to believe that the sales in toothpaste for Panama was going to be also very important. The second element that we analyzed was basically the market share that we used to have in country by country and category by category. And this is the example of toothpaste. In most of the countries, we used to enjoy more than 80% market share with some exception. And we say, okay, the target that we need to have in every country is achieved in the future no less than 80% market share. And here are the priorities in Costa Rica, is #1 priority because 10 points of market share in Costa Rica, since the market is pretty good and the per capita income is pretty high, value more than the 50% market share in Belize when the per capita income is very low and the per capita consumption also is very low. Second priority was in Honduras. We used to have a 50%. Honduras is a country with 7 million inhabitants, so it's very attractive and the economy was growing. So as a result of that, we end up using that as a second priority. And the main activity that later on we conduct was the acquisition of a local toothpaste that allowed to really increase the market share from 50 to 85%. And as a result of that, then the company start having the muscle to build the other categories that we have in the basket. And the third one basically was in Belize, but was more than develop the market by having the school plan running in all the schools in the country in order to start developing the young population to increase the per capita consumption in the future. What was the learnings? First of all is before running like independence countries with just the support of New York, obviously the growth wasn't as good as we were expecting. As I mentioned, the population and the economy in the region is similar to Colombia. And when you compare the sales that we used to have in the Central American region, was basically 40% less than the one that we used to have here in Colombia. So a big potential in Central America to grow. So we changed the organization, putting more resources in advertising. So really change the trend of growth for the region and start closing the gap with the possibilities that we used to have in the region, comparing that with Colombia. Also, we have a very difficult times, obviously, by trying to change the organization by countries to a regional one. I would say that the main issue was basically to retain the best talent that we used to have in the region, because they start seeing that sometimes we start moving the responsibility and the power to Guatemala. So they believe that they are losing the power and they prefer to leave the company. So that was one of the reasons. The other is part of the culture. It was a different culture between countries and some with some tension. For example, Panama believes that they are the more developed country, and Guatemala is probably, because of the Indian population, the lowest developed country. And as a result of that, they didn't want to report to Guatemala. And the same thing with Salvador and Honduras. They used to have a war between these two countries, so they don't want to work Salvadorian with Hondurans in the same offices. So that was the type of thing that we have to take care and use the human resources, people, and the knowledge that they have in order to create really a team experience into the region. The other is we have some calculated risk. I would say that the standardization of the products was very important, especially in the financial side, to get the synergies at the cost level. But also include some risk because could be a reaction from the consumers. I would say that the savings that we got allowed us to choose between all the formulation that we have in the region, the best one for the entire region. And in that way, we, for some countries, were basically the same traditional product, but for most of the other was basically a product improvement. And also was very difficult to move the sales and marketing functions that was basically a responsibility of each country and centralize that. Every country manager in the countries that we take this responsibility out was really scared to do that and really reacting negatively to the new organization. And finally, we have many paradigms, and I have here different economic levels between countries, also different laws between countries, labors and commercial laws, and also different local currencies. In Panama and El Salvador, we used to have dollars. In Guatemala, we have quetzales. In Honduras, lempiras. In Nicaragua, córdobas. And in Costa Rica, colones, with different devaluation, different rules from the central banks. And everybody saying, my God, and what currency we are going to use to report the region? And we say we have to report in dollars, since this is basically US corporation. We report in dollars, so everybody need to start understanding the impact of the in dollars for your sales and the business. And that through the system was very easy to have the information in dollars in a real time. And also we have different competitors and customers country by country. So we say, my God, how we are going to tailor a strategy that fit well in all countries and with all customers and all competitors and different consumers. And at the end of the day, everything was slowly but surely moving into the standard process that was part of the success of this story. Finally, I would say that it was important, the leadership for the company. First, obviously, the general manager in the region, but I would say that huge support from the divisional president that was so important. So the synergies between these two positions, I would say, was so important. And then when the president of the corporation starts seeing the result and starts seeing the potential of this organization in the rest of the world, obviously his support was really outstanding and really helped us to really implement that without any troubles with the corporation. So I would say that was very important to use the brain, and here I use the brain because it was the preparation of the entire plan with small details in every country, every function, in order to make that successful at the end of the day. So that was a lot of thinking behind this project. Also, we impact with our decision many people in the company, many of them from the production side, an engineer that was working in Panama, Costa Rica, Honduras, and El Salvador. And for some of them, we have places in Guatemala. From others, we need to get rid of them. So we paid the indemnification. That was the easy part. But also, I think the main contribution from the leader was basically to help them to find a job in another subsidiary, another corporation, and was really a good action for them. And the last thing is that it was very tough to really convince first the division and then the corporation to implement this idea. It was just an idea. So it requires a lot of commitment, a lot of confidence, to finally conduct the plan and start investing the money, hopefully that in the future, the good thing that we are thinking were really coming true. So with that is basically the experience in the Central American re-engineering process that really end up having really strong business there. Today is very strong business. Most of the leading projects in the company marketing and are obviously developing and using Guatemala as the school to really expand the knowledge and the experience to other areas of the globe that we have in the corporation. So thank you very much. This was basically the presentation.